I never imagined that one day, the thunderous roar of dozens of Harley-Davidsons would be the sweetest sound I'd ever heard, especially as they rolled straight toward the lavish wedding illegally taking place in my backyard. Living in our pristine suburban neighborhood for 5 years had taught me to keep my head down and follow the ridiculous HOA regulations enforced by our self-appointed queen, Karen Wilson. The same Karen who now stood directing wedding staff around my property as if she owned it, transforming my meticulously maintained garden into her daughter's dream wedding venue without so much as asking. The sheer audacity left me speechless, my property rights trampled under white folding chairs and satin ribbons, while Karen smugly informed me that as HOA president, community spaces were at her discretion. When I produced the property documents proving the garden was exclusively mine, she threatened me with violations and fines that would make my life very difficult. That's when I remembered my unlikely friendship with the local motorcycle club, the Thunder Roads Riders, who had helped me rebuild my fence after last year's storm, the same fence Karen was now decorating with fairy lights. These leather-clad men and women with tattoos and hearts of gold had become my friends despite Karen's numerous complaints about their occasional visits. One phone call to Mike, their president, explaining my situation was all it took. "Don't worry," he chuckled, "we'll bring the whole gang to celebrate. Been a while since we attended a fancy wedding." As I watched Karen direct the placement of the wedding cake, I smiled knowing that in 2 hours, my property would be reclaimed by the rumble of engines and the confused faces of wedding guests encountering 30 bikers arriving to join the celebration of a venue that was never Karen's to offer. Maple Grove Estates had always been the picture of suburban perfection, with its manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and houses painted in the strictly regulated palette of acceptable neutrals. Living here meant surrendering to a 47-page HOA rulebook that dictated everything from the height of your grass, never to exceed 2.5 inches, to the precise hours you could place your trash cans at the curb, no earlier than 7 p.m. the night before collection, and removed by 8 p.m. on collection day. The neighborhood newsletter, which Karen insisted on hand-delivering monthly, featured a wall of shame highlighting violations with photos of offending homes. My relationship with Karen Wilson had been strained from the day I moved in 3 years ago, when she'd greeted me with a measuring tape and clipboard rather than a welcome basket. "Your moving truck is blocking the communal driveway by approximately 3.7 inches, she'd announced before introducing herself. Since then, I'd received citations for Christmas lights left up 3 days past the January 2nd deadline, a garden hose visibly coiled beside my house, and once, memorably, for excessive bird activity when my feeder attracted too many cardinals. My property at 724 Sycamore Lane was unique in Maple Grove, the last house on the cul-de-sac, with a spacious backyard that sloped gently down to a small stream bordered by mature oak trees. The previous owner had been a landscape architect who transformed the space into a stunning garden with a natural stone patio, a small pond with water lilies, and beds of perennials that bloomed in carefully orchestrated succession from spring to fall. This garden was my sanctuary, my reward after long shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. It was also, apparently, the perfect wedding venue for someone unwilling to pay rental fees. I'd been working double shifts that week, covering for a colleague on maternity leave. Thursday evening, exhausted after 14 hours in the ICU, I pulled into my driveway to find unfamiliar vans parked along the street and people in uniforms carrying folding chairs across my lawn. For a moment, I thought I'd somehow driven to the wrong house. Then I spotted Karen, clipboard in hand, directing a young man struggling with an archway covered in white roses. "No, more to the left," she was saying. "The bride wants it perfectly centered with the oak tree." I stepped out of my car, still in my scrubs. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice cracking with fatigue and confusion. "What's happening here?" Karen turned, her face momentarily registering surprise before settling into her usual condescending smile. "Oh, you're home early. We're setting up for Madison's wedding. Saturday at 4. She said this as if it explained everything, as if I should have known all along. "Madison, your daughter? Having her wedding in my backyard?" The absurdity of the situation momentarily robbed me of more articulate response. "Yes, isn't it perfect? The gazebo will go there," she pointed to my herb garden, "and we'll have seating for 150 guests across the lawn. The reception tent will be over by the pond." She beamed with pride, as if showing off her own accomplishment. "Karen, this is my private property. You can't just decide to host your daughter's wedding here without asking me. Her smile tightened. Actually, this garden is part of the community green space according to the original neighborhood plans. As HOA president, I can authorize its use for community events. This was a blatant lie. When I purchased the house, the expanded garden had been one of the main selling points, and I paid property taxes on every square foot of it. That's not true, I said, feeling anger replace my fatigue. This is my private property. I have the deed and property maps to prove it. Karen waved dismissively. Those were amended when the HOA was established. Now, if you'll excuse me, we need to finish before it gets dark. I stood my ground as workers continued moving around me. I never agreed to any amendment, and I want everyone off my property right now, or I'm calling the police. This finally got her full attention. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Let's not be difficult. Madison has been planning this wedding for a year. Everything is arranged. If you make a scene, I'll have to report multiple violations I've been overlooking. Your hydrangeas exceed the approved height by 8 inches, your garden shed needs repainting, and I noticed you've installed unapproved solar lights along your walkway. The fines would be substantial. Her threat hung in the air between us. I went inside and emerged 10 minutes later with my property documents, including surveys and the official plot map from the county assessor's office. I thrust them toward Karen, who glanced at them with obvious disdain. These clearly show that the entire garden is part of my property, I said, pointing to the boundaries. There's no easement, no community space. You're trespassing, and if you don't leave, I will call the police. Karen's face flushed red. Do you have any idea what you're doing? She hissed, lowering her voice so the workers wouldn't hear. This wedding has cost over $30,000. Madison will be devastated. And I promise you, if you ruin this, your life in Maple Grove will become very uncomfortable. I can make sure every single HOA regulation is enforced to the letter on your property. Daily inspections. Maximum fines. I have the board wrapped around my finger. She was right about one thing, she did have influence with the HOA board, mostly retirees who feared her enough to rubber stamp her decisions. Fighting her through official channels would be a nightmare. As I watched workers trampling my flower beds to set up what looked like a dance floor, something inside me snapped. I'd spent 3 years being pushed around by this woman, watching her bully everyone in the neighborhood into submission with her arbitrary rules and selective enforcement. Not this time. Not my garden. That's when I remembered the Thunder Roads writers. I'd met them 6 months ago when I treated one of their members in the ER after a minor accident. Mike, their president, had been so grateful for my care that he'd given me his personal number. Anything you ever need, just call, he'd said. A few weeks later, when a storm damaged my fence, I'd called to ask if he knew any reliable repair services. The next day, Mike showed up with 5 club members, tools, and materials, and rebuilt my fence better than it had been before. When Karen had complained about those people visiting my property, citing a non-existent HOA rule about unsavory characters, I'd ignored her. The bikers had become occasional visitors since then, sometimes stopping by on weekend rides, much to Karen's visible disgust. I went inside, closed the door, and called Mike. Hey, it's Alex from Maple Grove. Remember me, the nurse? His warm voice immediately answered, of course. How's that fence holding up? The fence is great, but I've got a situation. The HOA president is setting up her daughter's wedding in my backyard without permission. She's threatened me with endless fines if I try to stop her. Mike was silent for a moment. She's doing what now? I explained the full situation, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and helplessness. When I finished, Mike chuckled. Well, sounds like you're having a party Saturday at 4, and you need some guests. Am I hearing that right? Relief washed over me. Exactly. I'd love if you and your friends could drop by. Apparently, there's going to be cake. We do love cake, Mike said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. How many guests would you like at your party? I looked out the window at the elaborate setup taking shape. As many as you can bring. ideally arriving right around 4, when the ceremony is supposed to start. Leave it to us. We'll make sure it's memorable. After hanging up, I felt a strange calm. Saturday would indeed be memorable, just not in the way Karen expected. I spent Friday watching the wedding preparations advance with military precision. Florists, caterers, lighting specialists, Karen had spared no expense for her daughter's big day. I almost felt guilty thinking about what would happen. Almost. By Saturday afternoon, my backyard had been transformed into something from a bridal magazine: white chairs in perfect rows, a flower-covered archway, crystal decorations hanging from my oak trees catching the afternoon light. A string quartet was setting up near the pond. Guests would begin arriving in less than an hour. I changed into my nicest casual outfit, not formal enough for a wedding, but respectable enough that I wouldn't look out of place. At precisely 3:45 p.m., I heard it, the distant rumble that gradually grew louder. From my front window, I watched the first motorcycles appear at the entrance to our cul-de-sac, then more and more, until the entire street seemed filled with gleaming chrome and leather-clad riders. Mike led the procession, pulling up to my driveway and removing his helmet with a grin. Behind him were at least 30 riders, some with passengers. "Ready for your party?" he asked, extending his hand to shake mine. I brought a few friends who were very interested in attending a fancy garden party. By 4 o'clock, my backyard had transformed into something straight out of a luxury wedding magazine. Crystal champagne flutes glinted in the afternoon sun as waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits mingled on my patio, admiring the elaborate floral arrangements that now covered every available surface. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as guests settled into their white chairs, programs in hand. Karen, resplendent in a lavender mother-of-the-bride dress and matching fascinator, fluttered from group to group, accepting compliments on the venue as if it were her own creation. Madison, her daughter, waited out of sight in my home office, which had been commandeered as a bridal prep room. From my bedroom window, I watched the scene unfold, checking my watch repeatedly. The officiant took his place beneath the floral arch, and the groom and his groomsmen filed in from the side. Just as the quartet shifted to the first notes of "Here Comes the Bride," the distant rumble began. At first, it was barely noticeable over the music, a low vibration that gradually swelled into an unmistakable roar. Heads turned toward the side gate of my garden, which now swung open to reveal Mike, leading a procession of leather-clad bikers into the ceremony space. The contrast was immediate and spectacular. 30-plus members of the Thunder Road's riders in their vests covered with patches, bandanas, and sunglasses, astride gleaming Harleys, Indians, and custom choppers, rolling slowly onto my lawn between the rows of seated guests. The quartet faltered and stopped playing. One of the violinists actually lowered her instrument mid-note, her mouth hanging open. A woman in the front row clutched her pearls, literally clutched her pearl necklace, while her husband stood up in confusion. The motorcycles moved with deliberate slowness, engines growling in a synchronized symphony that drowned out the panicked whispers erupting throughout the gathering. Karen froze mid-conversation, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the stone patio. Her face cycled through emotions: confusion, shock, horror, and finally, incandescent rage. She spotted me walking out to greet Mike as he cut his engine and dismounted. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, charging toward us as the rest of the motorcycle club parked their bikes in a neat semicircle around the seating area. Guests scrambled out of their chairs, creating space between themselves and the unexpected arrivals. "These are my guests," I said calmly. "I invited them to the party in my backyard." Karen sputtered, her face turning the approximate color of a ripe tomato. "This is Madison's wedding. You can't do this." Mike removed his sunglasses, revealing kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Ma'am, we were invited to a celebration at our friend's home. We brought gifts." He gestured to his saddlebags, from which he pulled a neatly wrapped package. Several other riders did the same. "You." Karen spun toward me. "You did this deliberately. I'll have you fined. I'll have you evicted from the neighborhood." The father of the bride approached tentatively. "Karen, what's happening? Who are these people?" Before Karen could answer, a tearful Madison appeared in my doorway, her white gown catching the light. "Mom! The officiant says he's leaving. He says there's some kind of biker gang invasion and he doesn't feel safe." This seemed to snap Karen back to the immediate crisis. She turned to Mike, attempting a different approach. "Look, this is my daughter's wedding. Surely you can understand how important this day is. Whatever my disagreement with this person," she gestured dismissively toward me, "please don't punish an innocent bride." Mike looked genuinely sympathetic. "No one's trying to punish anyone, ma'am. We're just attending a gathering we were invited to. At our friend's home." He emphasized the last three words while maintaining perfect politeness. "This is not their home." Karen's voice rose again. "This garden is community property that I have authority to use." That's when Bill Henderson, my next-door neighbor who had suffered more than his share of Karen's HOA tyranny, stepped forward from among the wedding guests. "Actually, Karen, that's not true. And everyone here knows it." A murmur spread through the crowd. "You told us this was being held at the community garden by the clubhouse," another guest added. Karen's husband appeared from the crowd, his expression mortified as realization dawned. "Karen, is this someone's private property? Did you tell me you had permission?" The situation was unraveling quickly. Madison burst into tears, her mascara creating black rivers down her cheeks. "Mom, you promised everything was arranged properly." The guests were now openly discussing the situation, piecing together the truth as they watched the drama unfold. I almost felt sorry for Karen as her perfect facade crumbled. Almost. The groom's father, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "Karen, I think you need to explain exactly what's happening here. Richard and I paid for half of this wedding, and you assured us all permissions were properly secured." In that moment, with all eyes on her, Karen's authority evaporated. I thought. She stammered, looking desperately around for support and finding none. With remarkable timing, Mike's wife Susan, who had arrived on the back of his bike, approached Madison. "Honey, your dress is beautiful. I'm so sorry about this confusion. But maybe we can help." She turned to me. "Would it be okay if they finished the ceremony quickly? These kids shouldn't have their day ruined." I hesitated, looking at the tearful bride and her shell-shocked groom. They were victims in Karen's scheme too. "The ceremony only," I agreed. "After that, they'll need to move to another venue for the reception." Mike nodded approvingly, and several Thunder Roads members began quickly and efficiently rearranging the chairs that had been scattered in the confusion. Karen remained frozen in place, watching as her authority was usurped by leather-clad strangers. The officiant, persuaded by the sudden turn toward civility, agreed to perform an abbreviated ceremony. Madison and Richard exchanged vows beneath the flower arch while an unusual mix of wedding guests and bikers looked on. Karen stood at the back, her husband whispering intensely in her ear. As soon as the ceremony concluded, the father of the groom announced that the reception would be relocated to the country club where he was a member. Guests began filing out, casting curious glances at the bikers who politely made way for them. Madison stopped briefly to thank me, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Karen left without speaking to me, half dragged away by her husband. As the last of the wedding party departed, Mike turned to me with a grin. "So, about that cake they left behind." 2 hours later, my backyard hosted a very different kind of celebration. The Thunder Roads riders had broken out portable grills from their saddlebags, and the aroma of burgers and hot dogs filled the air. Someone had brought a portable speaker, and classic rock replaced classical music. Remarkably, several of my neighbors had returned, not for the wedding, but for what was quickly becoming the best block party Maple Grove had ever seen. Bill Henderson arrived with his wife and a cooler full of beer. The Patels from across the street brought homemade samosas. Even elderly Mrs. Abernathy, who had endured years of citations for her non-regulation garden gnomes, showed up with her famous brownies. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she cackled. Seeing Karen put in her place was worth every HOA fine I've ever paid. As twilight fell, paper lanterns replaced the crystal chandeliers that had been hastily removed, creating pools of warm light across my garden. Mike raised a beer bottle toward me. To new friends and reclaimed territory, he toasted. Everyone cheered. I learned later that Karen's position as HOA president was put to an emergency vote the following week. She was unanimously removed. Bill Henderson took over with a platform of reasonable rules reasonably enforced. The Thunder Roads riders became regular visitors to Maple Grove, often stopping by on Sunday afternoons. Strangely enough, their presence coincided with a notable decrease in crimes like package theft and vandalism. And every year on that same Saturday in June, I host what we now call the Wedding Crashers Barbecue, a neighborhood tradition that brings together the most unlikely mix of suburbanites and bikers anyone could imagine. Karen still lives in Maple Grove, though she crosses the street when she sees me coming. Sometimes I catch her watching our gatherings from a distance, and I always wave and invite her to join us. She never does, but I keep inviting her anyway. After all, I've learned the value of extending hospitality, even to those who would never do the same for you.